Welcome to this course on full-stack web development using React.js for front-end, Python Django for back-end and SQLite for the database. You will learn how to add navigation menu with routing in React, display data in Bootstrap Table, add modal pop-up window with drop-downs and date pickers. Also learn how to upload photo and store it in the backend server. Now let's install Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a popular lightweight open-source code editor developed by Microsoft. Just type install Visual Studio Code and follow the official website. Download and install it with default settings. We have successfully installed Visual Studio Code. Now let's install Postman, which will be used to test the API methods. Just type install Postman and go to official link. Download and install it with default settings. You don't have to create an account. Just click on Skip. We have now successfully installed Postman. Now let's install Node.js. Just type install Node.js and go to official link. Download and install it with default settings. You can open Node.js command prompt to check the version and verify the installation. We have now successfully installed Node.js. Let's install Python before installing Django. What you see on the screen is the official Django documentation website. What they suggest here is to install Python from the official site python.org. So let's follow the same. Download and install the appropriate version. Also check the checkbox to add Python 3.8 to the path. Let's verify the installation. Open command prompt and just type Python. You can see the version of Python installed. Let's write a simple code to print Hello World on the screen. We see that it works and we have successfully installed Python. Before installing Django, let's try to understand why creating virtual environments is needed. Let's assume you are working on two Django websites on your machine. One website is developed using version 1.0 of Django and another one developed with version 2.0. Also, you are instructed not to update the versions of any of these Django website projects. So considering this in mind, if you install Django at your system level, you can install only one version of Django. So you can work only on one Django project in your machine. To solve such problems, we can make use of something called as virtual environments. So using virtual environments, instead of installing one version of Django globally or at system level, we can install different versions to each virtual environment so that we can work on both the projects in a single machine. Now let's see how to create a virtual environment for our Django project. I am creating a new folder for this tutorial. Just open command prompt for this path. And type this command. Python-mvenv space the name of the virtual environment. Once the command is executed, a new folder with the given name will be created. So whenever we are working with our Django project, we need to activate this virtual environment. And also install any modules needed for our project to this virtual environment only. To activate the virtual environment, just type the environment name /scripts/activate. You can verify that the environment is activated by looking at the environment name at the left side. Let's install Django. First open the command prompt and activate the virtual environment. To install the latest version of Django, just type pip install Django. To create the API endpoints, we also need to install one more module called as Django REST Framework. So let's install it. We have now successfully installed Django and Django REST Framework. Let's now create the Django project. To create one, just type Django admin start project and the name of the project. I am going to name this project as Django API. Once the command is executed, a new folder with the project name will be created. Let's navigate inside the project and open the Visual Studio Code editor in that path by typing code space dot. Before taking a look at the project files, let's simply run the project and see how the output looks in the browser. Just type python manage.py runserver. The app is now running at port 8000. Just copy the URL and open it in the browser. We see that our project is created successfully, and what you see on the screen is the default template which gets created for every new Django projects. Now let's take a look at some of the important files in the project. Manage.py is a command line utility that helps us in interacting with our Django project. We had just now used it to server our app. SQLite 3 is the database file which we will be using to store data. We will explore it more later. init.py is just an empty file that tells Python that this directory should be considered a Python project or a Python module. Settings.py files consists of all the settings or configurations needed for this Django project. url.py file contains all the URL declarations for this Django project. asgi.py is the entry point for ASGI-compatible web servers to serve the project. And wsgi.py is the entry point for WSGI-compatible web servers. Let's see how to explore the default SQLite DB file that comes along with the creation of our Django project. To check what this database has, we can use something called SQLite Studio. So let's download the software. You don't have to install the software to use it, you can directly use it with the help of executable file that comes along with the download. Just double-click on the executable file to launch it. Click on Database and add database. Now we need to load the SQLite database file which is present in our Django project. Now it's easier for us to visualize what's inside our database file. Currently, we see that it does not have any tables in it. We will be creating tables here by creating models in our Django project which we will be seeing in upcoming tutorials. Also, you can open SQL Editor to write SQL queries on our database. Let's see how to enable the CORS in our Django project. The full form of CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. By default, all Django projects come with a security feature which blocks the API requests coming from different domains. This obviously is an essential feature because you don't want every to consume your API methods and access or modify your data. You need to have some kind of control to authorize only specific domains or apps to consume your API endpoints. We will now see how to do that. Let's first install the Django CORS headers package using pip install. Now let's open settings.py and register the CORS module by adding an entry in the installed apps and middleware sections. Finally, we need to specify which domains needs to be whitelisted. For this tutorial, I am allowing all the domains to access the APIs. But we need to be careful and whitelist only the specific domains. To do that, we just need to type CORS origin whitelist and specify the domain names, for example, google.com. Since I am already allowing all domains, let me delete this. Let's create an app in our Django project. Quick difference between projects and apps. The folder structure that you currently see on the screen, we call this as project. Now, a project may have multiple apps. Currently the project does not have any app. You can basically have multiple apps in your project. For example, you can have one app which acts like a blog. You can have another app which acts like a survey form. For now, let's create our first app to add the API methods to manage employee data. To create an app, we just need to type this command. Python manage.py startapp space the name of our app. We will be naming it as employee app. Next we need to register our app in the setting.py file. Also, let's register REST framework package because we are writing the API methods using Django REST framework module. Now let's create the models needed for our app. We basically need two models. One model which helps us to store department data, and another one to store employee data. Department model will have two fields. One field is auto increment id field. Another one to store department name. This is a char field with max length of 100 character. Employee model will have 5 fields. One to store the employee ID, which is an auto increment field. Then we have employee name. Next we have department name. Next we have date of joining, which is a date field. Finally we have a field to store the uploaded image file name. Now we need to run a couple of commands to create these tables in the SQLite database file. The first command is python manage.py make migrations employee app. Looks like we have made a syntax error. Let's correct it. What this command does is, it creates an intermediate file in the migrations folder which will have the details of what are the changes that will go to the database file. If things look fine, we need to run one more command to actually commit these changes to our database file. Python manage.py migrate employee app. The command is executed. Let's refresh our database to check. We see that our two tables are created successfully. Let's write a select query on them. We see that currently we don't have any data in them. Now let's create serializers for our models. Serializers basically help us in converting our complex types or model instances to native Python data types that can then be rendered easily into JSON or XML or other content types. They also help in deserialization, which is nothing but converting the parsed data back to complex types. Add a new file with name serializer.py. And import serializers from REST framework module. Also import our complex types or models. Now we need to write serializer classes for both our models. We have now added the serializers needed for our app. Now let's write our API methods for department screen. We are importing CSRF exempt decorator so that we can use it to allow other domains to easily access our API methods. By other domains, I mean our front-end project. We also need something called JSON parser to parse the incoming data into the data model. Let's import both the models. And also the corresponding serializer classes. Let's write our API methods for department screen. The method will receive an optional ID which we will be using in delete method to delete a record based on ID. Let's first write the get method which will simply return all the data from department table in JSON format. We are making use of Serializer class to help convert it into JSON format. The parameter safe equals false is basically used to inform Django that what we are trying to convert to JSON format is actually a valid format to be converted, and we are fine if there are any issues. Next, let's write the post method which will be used to insert new record into department table. First we need to parse it as JSON. And then use Serializer to convert it into model type. Finally, we check if the model is valid. If model is valid, we save it into database. And return a success message. If not, return failure message. Next, let's complete the put method which will be used to update an existing record. First we need to capture the existing record in the database using the department ID. Next, map it with new values using the Serializer class. Finally, if model is valid, we save it and return success message. If not, send a failure message. Finally, let's complete the delete method. For the delete method, we will be sending the department ID in the URL. So we will make use of it to extract the record from database based on the past ID and then delete it from database. Now let's run the Django project. Copy the URL. Let's test the API methods in Postman. We have forgotten to route our API method to a particular URL. Let's do that first. Create a new file in the employee app folder and name it as urls.py. Let's define our URL patterns and map it to our API method. If URL starts with text department and then ends, we need to map it to department API method. And for delete method, we will be passing the ID in the URL, so we need to route those requests also to the department API method. Next we need to include these URLs in the main URL.py file of our Django project. Now let's first test the get method. Since we don't have any data yet, we get an empty array. Let's insert a record using post method. We need to add JSON input in the body. The schema should match exactly as the column names our model. Let's add one department with name IT. We see that it was added successfully. We can run a select query to verify it in the SQLite Studio. Let's add another department. We can also verify it by calling the getAPI method. We can see we have two records now. Let's now verify the put method by changing the name of second department. We see that put method also works as expected. Let's finally test the delete method. All the API methods for department screen works as expected. Now let's write the API methods for employee screen. Since we have already written API methods for department screen, we just reuse them. Let's make a copy of all the methods. Now we just need to replace the variable names from department to employee. Now let's add the routing for our employee API methods. Finally, let's test the methods in Postman. We forgot to map the methods. Let's do it. The get method works as expected. Let's try post method. Post method works as expected. Now let's use the put method and change the employee name. Put method also works. Let's add one more employee using post method before using delete. Finally, let's test the delete method. All the API methods works as expected. Finally, we need to write one API method to save the uploaded profile picture. But before that, we need to store our image files in a folder. So let's create one in our project. Let's name it as media. Also, we need to add some keys in the setting.py file regarding the new folder. Now let's add the method. We are extracting the uploaded file from the request. Now we need to save it in the folder. We will make use of a module called default storage to do this. After saving, let's simply return back the file name. We need to add a static path to our app URL so that we can access media files through URL. Now we need to map a route path for the API method. Now let's test it by uploading an image. It should be a post request. Upload API method now works as expected. Let's now start creating the front-end part using React.js. Open up command prompt in the folder that you would like to create the project. Type npx create react app space the name of the app. Once command is executed, it creates a folder with the given project name. Let's see the contents using Visual Studio Code. The package.json file contains details of all the packages being used by this project. The node module folders is where all the packages are installed. Index.html file is the final file that gets rendered. We see that it only has one div tag with ID root. Let's see where this ID is being used. If we open index.js file, we see that the contents of app component is being injected into the div with ID root. Now let's see what are the contents of app component. Let's just run the project and check how it looks. Just type the command npm start. Let's delete all the contents of app component and just add an h3 tag. We see the h3 tag text, but the styling is not reflecting. This is because we have not installed React Bootstrap. Let's install it. Just copy and run the install command. Also, we need to copy the stylesheet link reference and paste it in index.html. Looks like the installation failed. Let's try again. It's now successfully installed. Let's check if it works. We see that the styling works as expected now. Now let's create the basic landing pages and navigation component. Create a new file and let name it home.js. We need to import couple of modules to create a React component. We are creating a class which returns the HTML view. Let's write a simple div tag with a simple text. Similarly, let's create a department component. And also employee component. Let's also create a navigation component and add the navigation menu. We will have 3 menus in navigation bar. One for home, one for department, and one for employee component. Now let's add our navigation component and other landing pages in the root component. We need to import all those components here. We need to import couple of modules from React Router DOM to configure the routing settings. Let's add the navigation menu. We need to define the routing configurations inside the switch tag. Looks like we need to install the module React Router DOM. Let's install it. We see that the navigation menu now works as expected. Now let's add our API URL. Create a file with name.env. Let's store the API URL with a variable name. Let's also store the photos URL. Also add the file name in gitignore. Let's add a constructor to our component. We need to write super props so that the component's constructor may get called. We can define our variables inside the state of this component. We are creating a variable to store department table data. Let's write a function to refresh departments array. We are writing fetch method to get data from the department API. Once the data is available, we update the departments array using setState method. We need to call the refresh method on a lifecycle method called as component didMount. We will also refresh the array on component didUpdate lifecycle method as well. Now let's add the Bootstrap table to display all departments. We display department ID and department name columns. Also one more column for edit and delete options. We now see department data in Bootstrap Table. Now let's create a screen to add department. This screen will be a modal pop-up window. Now let's add form with text box for department name. Let's add a button to save the department. The footer will have a close button to close the modal window. We will define the onHide function in department landing page. Let's define the handle submit method to save the department name using API. The body will have department name in JSON format. Once saved, we will display the message in alert box. If failed, we will display failed message in alert box. Now let's make changes in department landing screen to show or hide the modal pop-up window. Let's define a variable to show or hide the modal. Now let's add button toolbar for showing add department modal window. We need to also bind the handle submit function in the constructor. Now let's add new department. We see that we are now able to add new department. Let's complete edit department screen. Let's copy the contents of add department screen and make changes to it. The API will be put instead of post. We need to send the department ID for update. Let's add one disabled form to display department ID. Also we need to send the value from first screen and bind it using default value attribute. Let's add one variable to display or hide edit modal window. Let's add edit button. And pass the department ID and department name to the modal window. We see that the update method works as expected. Let's finally add delete method as well. Delete department will be a function which calls the delete API with the department ID. We will ask for confirmation before delete. We see that delete method also works as expected. Now let's complete the employee screens. We need to change API from department to employee. We may need additional variables for department, photo file name and date of joining. We see that landing screen for employee details is working fine as expected. Now let's complete the Add New Employee screen. We need to declare departments array to show values in drop-down. We may need some variables to store profile picture details and photo paths. Let's populate the drop-down array value in component didMount lifecycle method. Let's add a method to save the uploaded photo. We make use of form data and append the uploaded file to it. Then send this photo to the SaveFile API method. Once successful, we update the image source. The department field will be a drop-down. We will be mapping the department names using the array. The date of joining will be a date picker. We may also need to display the uploaded profile picture. And also a button to upload new photo, which will call the SaveFile API. Also, we need to bind the upload method in constructor. Let's try adding a new employee. We see that Add New Employee works as expected. Let's now complete the Edit Employee screen. Let's change the post method to put. Let's display read-only employee ID. We need to pass the default values from employee landing screen. We see that update works as expected. With this we have completed all the basic functionalities of our employee management app.